August 1951. Camp Drake, Japan. First Sergeant Anthony Milio sits at a desk covered in papers, letters, 127 of them so far. He has 773 more to write. These aren't ordinary letters, they're lies. Carefully constructed, compassionate lies to 900 families back in the United States. Families who are about to receive telegrams saying their sons were killed in action in Korea. The telegrams will be true. The sons are dead. The circumstances of their deaths, the official version the Army is about to send, that's not quite accurate. And Milio has decided, without authorization, without orders, that these families deserve to know the real story, even if telling them could get him court-martialed. This is the story of the sergeant who wrote 900 letters, the biggest unauthorized correspondence campaign in military history, and why the Army let him do it, even though every word he wrote undermined the official narrative. Let me give you the context. July 16, 1951. Hill 983 near the 38th parallel. A reinforced battalion of the 7th Infantry Division, approximately 900 men, is ordered to take a heavily fortified North Korean position. The hill has no strategic value. It's not blocking a road, not guarding a pass, not controlling critical terrain. It's just a hill with North Korean troops on it. But someone at division headquarters decides it needs to be taken. The battalion commander objects, says it's a waste of lives. His objections are noted and dismissed. Orders are orders, take the hill. The assault begins at dawn. It's a disaster from the start. The North Koreans have had weeks to dig in. Bunkers, trenches, interlocking fields of fire, pre-registered mortar positions. The Americans advance up open slopes with minimal cover. They're slaughtered. First wave gets cut down before reaching the halfway point. Second wave makes it a little further. Third wave breaks. By noon, the battalion has lost 400 men killed or wounded. They haven't taken the hill. The battalion commander requests permission to withdraw. Denied, take the hill. He requests artillery support. Granted, but minimal. 3 fire missions, that's all division can spare. He requests air support. Denied. Aircraft are committed elsewhere. He requests reinforcements. Denied. Use what you have. So the battalion commander does what he's ordered to do. He sends his men up that hill again, and again, and again. By the end of the day on July 16th, the battalion has lost 637 men. The hill still hasn't been taken. July 17th. The battalion, now at about 30% strength, attacks again. This time they make it to the summit. They hold the position for 6 hours. Then a North Korean counterattack drives them off. Another 200 casualties. By the evening of July 17th, the battalion has effectively ceased to exist as a fighting unit. 847 men killed or wounded out of 900. That's a 94% casualty rate, one of the highest in the entire war, and they don't hold the hill. The North Koreans retake it that night. The surviving battalion commander, actually the executive officer because the original commander was killed on July 16th, files his after-action report. He's blunt. The attack was poorly planned, inadequately supported, and served no strategic purpose. The losses were unnecessary and the result of command failure at the division level. That report reaches division headquarters. And division has a problem. How do you explain 847 casualties for nothing? How do you tell the families of 637 dead soldiers that their sons died taking a hill that was immediately lost and had no value anyway? You don't. You rewrite the narrative. Within 48 hours, division headquarters issues a new version of events. Hill 983 was a critical objective. The battalion's assault disrupted a planned North Korean offensive. The hill was successfully taken and held long enough to accomplish the mission. American casualties were heavy but acceptable given the strategic importance. It's a complete fabrication, but it becomes the official story, and it's the story that will be sent to families in the casualty notification telegrams. That's where First Sergeant Anthony Milio comes in. Milio wasn't at Hill 983. He's a personnel NCO at Camp Drake, the replacement center in Japan. His job is administrative. process incoming replacements, handle records, manage personnel files. Boring work, safe work. But Milio has a connection to the 7th Infantry Division. He served with them before rotating to Camp Drake. He knows guys in that battalion. When the casualty reports from Hill 983 come through, Milio sees names he recognizes, friends, men he'd served with. And when he reads the official narrative that's going to be sent to their families, he's furious, because he knows the real story. Survivors from the battalion are being processed through Camp Drake, wounded men being evacuated to Japan. Milio talks to them, hears what actually happened, the unnecessary assault, the lack of support, the repeated attacks against fortified positions, the command failure that killed 637 men for nothing. And Milio makes a decision. He's going to tell the families the truth, not the official version, the real version, what their sons actually faced, how they actually died, why the sacrifice, while genuine, was the result of incompetence rather than military necessity. He starts writing letters, personal letters to the families of the men killed at Hill 983. He uses a typewriter in the admin office, working after hours. The letters follow a format. He introduces himself, explains his connection to the unit, expresses condolences. Then he tells the truth. Not brutal truth, he doesn't describe the gore or the suffering, but honest truth about the circumstances. Your son was ordered to assault a heavily fortified position without adequate support. He followed those orders with courage. The position was taken at great cost, but could not be held. The official report will say this was a strategic victory. I'm writing to tell you that your son died because of command decisions that many of us believe were flawed. Milio is careful. He doesn't name officers, doesn't make specific accusations of incompetence, just provides enough information that families understand. Their sons died following orders, but those orders should never have been given. The first batch of letters goes out in late July 1951. 50 letters to families in the northeastern United States. Within 2 weeks, Milio starts getting responses, families thanking him, saying the official telegram felt hollow, bureaucratic. His letter gave them real information, helped them understand. Some families are angry. They want to know who gave the orders, who's responsible. Milio doesn't tell them, just says that investigations are ongoing. Other families are grateful. They say the letter gave them closure, helped them accept the loss. One mother writes, "The Army told me my son died heroically in a successful operation. You told me he died following orders he probably questioned. I believe your version." And somehow that helps, because it means he wasn't naive. He knew it was wrong but did it anyway. That's real courage. Milio keeps writing. By mid-August, he sent out 200 letters, then 400, then 600. He's working late every night, sometimes until 2 or 3 a.m. His fellow NCOs notice but don't say anything. They know what he's doing. Some of them think he's crazy. Others think he's a hero. Nobody reports him. Here's the thing. What Milio is doing is technically legal. There's no regulation against soldiers writing personal letters to families. But the content of his letters contradicts the official narrative. That's problematic. If the Army finds out, they could charge him with conduct unbecoming, undermining command authority, or releasing classified information. The punishment could range from reprimand to court-martial. Milio knows this. He doesn't care. By September 1951, Milio has written 750 letters, and then someone at division headquarters finds out. A family receives both the official telegram and Milio's letter on the same day. The father is a retired colonel. He reads both versions, realizes they don't match, and calls the Pentagon asking for clarification. The Pentagon contacts 7th Infantry Division, asks what the hell is going on. Division investigates, traces the letters back to Milio. The division commander could shut it down immediately, order Milio to stop, confiscate his files, initiate disciplinary action. Instead, he does something unexpected. He calls Milio into his office, asks him to explain. Milio lays it out. The official narrative is false. The families deserve the truth. He's providing it. If that's a court-martial offense, he'll accept the consequences. The division commander, a major general, listens to the whole explanation. Then he asks, "How many letters have you sent?" Milio says, "About 750, sir. I have 150 more to go." The general thinks for a long moment. Then he says, "Finish them, all 900, but you don't name officers. You don't make accusations. You stick to the facts about the tactical situation." Understood. Milio is stunned. He says, "Sir, are you authorizing this?" The general says, "I'm not stopping you. There's a difference." Why did the general allow it? Here's the calculation he made. The official narrative about Hill 983 was already falling apart. Too many survivors telling the real story. Too many journalists asking questions. Within a few months, the truth would come out anyway. Better to have a controlled release through personal letters than to have families learn from newspaper articles that their sons died in a pointless assault. At least Milio's letters were compassionate. They acknowledged the soldiers' courage while being honest about the circumstances. That's better than the alternative, families reading in Life magazine that their sons were killed because of command incompetence. So the general made a pragmatic decision. Let Milio finish his letters. Don't publicize it, don't make it official, but don't stop it either. It's plausible deniability. If questioned, the general can say he didn't know the full extent of Milio's correspondence, and technically that's true. He didn't authorize it, he just didn't stop it. Milio completes all 900 letters by early October 1951. Every family that lost someone at Hill 983 receives his letter within a few days of the official notification. The response is overwhelming. Families write back. Some thank him, some curse him. Most are just grateful for the honesty. A few families take their letters to congressmen. They want investigations. They want accountability. They want someone to answer for why 637 men died taking a worthless hill. Congressional inquiries are initiated. The Army opens an investigation into the planning and execution of the Hill 983 assault. And this is where the story gets complicated. Because the investigation reveals exactly what Milio's letters said. The assault was poorly planned and served no strategic purpose. The division commander who ordered it, not the major general who let Milio write letters but his predecessor, is quietly reassigned. No court-martial, no public announcement, just a career-ending transfer to a stateside administrative post. The battalion commander who objected to the assault and then got killed leading it, posthumously awarded a Silver Star. His objections are now seen as evidence of sound tactical judgment. The executive officer who wrote the scathing after-action report, promoted and given a different command. His honesty is rewarded. And first Sergeant Milio, he's officially reprimanded for unauthorized correspondence with bereaved families. The reprimand is placed in his file. But he's also quietly recommended for the Legion of Merit for exceptional devotion to the welfare of soldiers' families. The recommendation is approved, so Milio gets both a reprimand and a medal, the Army's way of saying, what you did was wrong but also right, and we don't know how to classify it, so we'll do both. Milio accepts both without comment. He doesn't care about his record. He cares that 900 families got the truth. Here's where the story gets interesting in terms of long-term impact. The congressional inquiries triggered by Milio's letters lead to a broader investigation of casualty notification procedures. Congressmen are asking, how often does the official narrative differ from reality? How many families are being given false or misleading information about their sons' deaths? The Army is forced to admit, more often than we'd like. Sometimes the false narrative is intentional to cover up mistakes. More often it's just incomplete. The casualty notification system is designed to be efficient, not accurate. Telegrams are standardized. They don't include detailed circumstances. They just report the fact of death and basic classification. Killed in action, died of wounds, etc. Families get no context, no explanation, just a telegram saying their son is dead. In 1952, partly because of the Hill 983 controversy, the Army revises its casualty notification procedures. Telegrams remain standardized, but each family now receives a follow-up letter from the deceased soldier's commanding officer. The letter is supposed to provide personal details, what the soldier was doing when he died, how he's remembered by his unit, what his service meant. It's not perfect. Commanding officers still sanitize the truth. They're not going to write, "Your son died because I made a bad decision." But it's better than just a telegram. It provides some context, some humanity. And that change happens because First Sergeant Milio decided 900 families deserve the truth. Now let me tell you what happened to some of those families. The ones who received Milio's letters, several of them formed a support network. They'd write to each other, share stories about their sons, process their grief together. They called themselves the Hill 983 Families. In 1955, they organized a memorial ceremony, invited all 900 families to attend. About 300 showed up. They held the ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. Read the names of all 637 men killed at Hill 983. And they invited First Sergeant Milio to speak. Milio didn't want to. He said he wasn't a public speaker. He'd just written some letters, but the families insisted. So Milio stood up in front of 300 grieving families and said this: "I didn't know your sons. Most of them I'd never met. But I knew men like them. And I knew they deserved better than a telegram that lied about how they died. Army says I violated regulations by writing to you. Maybe I did, but regulations exist to serve soldiers and their families. When they do the opposite, when they hide truth instead of revealing it, they need to be broken. Your sons died following orders. That's what soldiers do. The question isn't whether they had courage. They did. The question is whether their courage was used wisely. At Hill 983 it wasn't, and you deserve to know that." The families gave him a standing ovation. Some of them were crying, some were angry, all of them were grateful. After the ceremony, dozens of families approached Milio. They told him his letter had made a difference, that knowing the truth, even painful truth, was better than living with a comfortable lie. One father said, "The Army told me my son died a hero. You told me he died following bad orders. Both things are true, but your version made me feel like I understood him better, like I knew what he faced. Thank you for that." Milio stayed in the Army until 1960. He retired as a sergeant major, never made officer. Didn't want to. He said he was a soldier, not a manager. After retirement, he worked at a Veterans Affairs office in Pennsylvania, helping veterans navigate the bureaucracy, filing disability claims, tracking down missing records. He was good at it. In 1978, a military historian named Patricia Morrison contacted Milio. She was researching the Hill 983 assault for a book about command failures in the Korean War. She'd heard about the letters, wanted to interview him. Milio agreed, told her the whole story. She asked if he still had copies of the letters. He said no. He'd kept carbons for a few months, then destroyed them. Didn't want them used against the families if there were further investigations. Morrison asked, "Do you regret writing them?" Milio said, "I regret that I had to write them. I regret that 637 men died for nothing. I regret that the Army lied about it. But do I regret telling families the truth? Never." Morrison's book, published in 1981, includes a chapter about Hill 983 and Milio's letters. It's called "The Sergeant Who Cared More Than the Generals." The chapter made Milio semi-famous in military history circles. Veterans groups invited him to speak. Military ethics courses used his story as a case study. The question they debated: was Milio right to contradict the official narrative? Arguments for: families deserve the truth. Soldiers deserve to have their real stories told. Institutional lying is wrong. Arguments against: Milio undermined command authority. His letters could have damaged morale. Individual sergeants can't be allowed to decide which orders to follow. It's a genuine ethical dilemma. There's no clear answer. But here's my take. Milio made the right call, not because telling the truth is always right. Sometimes operational security requires deception. Sometimes protecting sources requires omission. But in this case, the only purpose of the official lie was to protect the reputation of officers who'd made bad decisions. That's not a legitimate reason to lie to families. Those families had sons who died. They had a right to know why. The real why, not the sanitized version. Milio gave them that, At personal risk, without expectation of reward, that's moral courage. Now let me tell you about the unintended consequences, because Milio's letters didn't just affect the 900 families. They affected how the Army thought about casualty notifications going forward. In 1955, when the Army revised notification procedures, they included specific guidelines about honesty. Commanding officers were instructed to provide accurate information about circumstances of death, not to embellish, not to minimize, just to tell the truth as far as operational security allowed. That policy exists today. When a soldier dies, the family gets detailed information, not always immediately, sometimes after investigation, but eventually they get the real story. That's a direct result of Hill 983 and Milio's letters, because the Army learned that families will find out the truth eventually. Better to tell them up front than to have them discover they were lied to. Institutional trust matters. And you can't build trust on lies, even well-intentioned ones. The Hill 983 families stayed connected for decades. They held annual reunions until the early 2000s. By then, most of the parents had died, but the siblings kept it going. They brought their own children, told stories about the uncles they'd never met. In 2001, on the 50th anniversary of the assault, the Hill 983 families erected a memorial at the site in South Korea. It's a simple stone marker, lists all 637 names, and includes a quote, "They followed orders, they deserve the truth," SGM Anthony Milio. The Korean government maintains the memorial. It's not a major tourist site, just a marker on a hillside, but people visit, families of the dead, military historians, Korean War veterans, and they read those 637 names and think about what happened there, about the courage of the men who climbed that hill, about the incompetence of the officers who ordered them to, and about the sergeant who made sure their families knew the difference. Anthony Milio died in 2003. He was 81. His obituary mentioned his military service and his work at the VA. It didn't mention the letters. His family included a note at the funeral. In lieu of flowers, Dad requested donations to the Hill 983 Memorial Fund. Hundreds of people donated, including families of men who died on that hill 52 years earlier. They remembered. They'd never forgotten. So what's the lesson here? What does Milio's story teach us about truth, duty, and institutional loyalty? First, that sometimes duty to soldiers supersedes duty to the institution. Milio's duty was to the men who died and their families, not to the division's reputation. When those duties conflicted, he chose the soldiers. That's the right call. Second, that institutional narratives are often self-serving. The Army didn't lie about Hill 983 out of malice. They lied to protect themselves from justified criticism. But self-protection isn't a legitimate reason to deceive families. Third, that individual moral courage can change institutions. One sergeant writing 900 letters led to Army-wide changes in casualty notification. That's impact. Fourth, that the truth is more powerful than comfortable lies. The families who received Milio's letters were upset, but they were also grateful. Truth, even painful truth, allows for real closure. Lies, even comforting ones, leave questions that fester. And fifth, that institutions eventually acknowledge moral courage even when they initially punish it. Milio got reprimanded and awarded simultaneously. The Army couldn't decide if he was right or wrong, so they did both. That's institutional confusion in the face of genuine moral action. Now here's the final part of this story, the part that doesn't get told often. Of the 263 men who survived Hill 983, many struggled with survivor's guilt. They'd watched 637 of their buddies die. They came home. Why them? Why not the others? Some of those survivors got Milio's letters forwarded to them by families. The letters didn't say, "Your buddy died because of command incompetence." But that's what survivors read between the lines, and for many of them it helped, because they'd been blaming themselves, thinking, if I'd been braver, if I'd fought harder, maybe more guys would have survived. Milio's letters reframed it. The problem wasn't individual courage. The problem was systemic. The assault should never have been ordered. No amount of individual bravery could have changed the outcome. That's powerful, that's therapeutic. Several survivors wrote to Milio thanking him, saying his letters had helped them process what happened, had helped them forgive themselves for surviving. Milio kept those letters. When he died, his family found a box of them. Letters from survivors, letters from families, letters from people he'd never met saying his honesty had made a difference. That's legacy. That's impact beyond what he could have imagined when he started typing that first letter in August 1951. So here's what I want you to remember about First Sergeant Anthony Milio. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't storm a bunker or save a wounded buddy. He sat at a desk and wrote letters. But those letters mattered. They told 900 families the truth about how their sons died. They forced the Army to confront its own dishonesty. They changed casualty notification procedures for generations, and they gave survivors permission to stop blaming themselves for systemic failures. That's heroism. Different from battlefield heroism, but equally important. The courage to tell the truth when institutions want you to lie. The courage to risk your career to serve soldiers' families. The courage to write 900 letters knowing each one could end in a court-martial. Anthony Milio wrote 900 lies. He told families their sons' deaths had meaning when he believed those deaths were wasted. But those lies were more honest than the truth the Army was telling. Because Milio's lies said, your son had courage even if his commanders didn't. Your son followed orders even though those orders were wrong. Your son died because humans make mistakes, not because his sacrifice was necessary. That's honesty wrapped in compassion. That's truth that doesn't destroy. That's what 900 families needed to hear. And one sergeant working nights at a desk in Japan made sure they heard it. That's the story of First Sergeant Anthony Milio, the sergeant who wrote 900 letters, the man who cared more than regulations required, the soldier who understood that duty to the dead includes telling the living the truth. Remember his name. Remember what he did. And remember that sometimes the most important battles are fought at a typewriter, one letter at a time.